This is crime scene investigator Chris G, leading you under the police tape and into a crime scene. Join me as we discuss the ever-changing world of forensic science. Put on your PPE, ready your fingerprint brushes, and experience the drama of a crime scene. Hello everyone, and welcome to another podcast. I'm sorry it's been a little while. I always start these podcasts by apologising. I've had a lot going on. I compared myself to a video game character. This is one of my side quests, and yeah, I've got lots of side quests going on. My main quest being obviously my role as a crime scene investigator. But yeah, this side quest I try and do once a month to just demonstrate my work, what I do, hopefully inspire you to maybe think about doing something like this. I was contacted by an author who said these are a great resource for their research into their books and things, just so they can get things factually right. And on that note, I thought I'd talk about fingerprints, say what fingerprints are, the history behind the fingerprints, and how I develop and recover fingerprints from a scene. So no doubt during this podcast you will look at your hands and your fingers multiple times, so just go with it. Just if ever I prompt you to look at your hands, just do so. If you're in a public area, then people might think you're a bit mad, but yeah, if they ask you, just say, hey, I'm listening to this really interesting podcast about fingerprints, and spread the word. So firstly, what are fingerprints? So across our skin we have sweat pores, including on our hands and feet. So if you were to look at your fingerprints under a microscope, you'd see all these little dots, and there are sweat pores, and that's how our sweat escapes our body. Our sweat is around 95% water. The other 5% is consisting of salt and amino acids. When we see fingerprints on a surface, it's actually someone's sweat that we're seeing, and it leaves a kind of nice pattern behind of their fingerprints. They're what we call skin friction ridge detail, and that's what we aim to develop when we go to a crime scene. So fingerprints stay unchanged throughout our life. They are formed at about 24 weeks in the womb. So when a newborn baby comes out, they're going to have their fingerprints on their fingers that's going to stay the same for the rest of their life. The only way it would change is if, you scar your finger, burn it, or, heaven forbid, lose a finger. I've had to fingerprint someone before that I think I could only get about 7 fingers because they'd lost 3 due to a work accident. And yeah, of course, I'm not going to take the fingerprints from a finger that's not there. But in the womb, when a baby's being developed, they will more often than not press their index finger and their thumb together, and they'll almost hold it, almost like 2 little tweeting birds. And this causes the index finger to have a different kind of general shape to the other fingers. So if you look at your fingers now, you might see that you've got, a pattern that kind of goes in one direction, but on your index finger it might go in another direction. And as I said, this is just because a baby in the womb will just press these two, the finger and their thumbs together, and it will just kind of develop differently. So the ridges on our fingers and feet are there to provide grip. They're called friction ridge detail, and it does exactly that. It causes friction between what we're holding and what we're stepping on, and hopefully our fingerprints and footprints will stop us from falling over or dropping things, which doesn't always work in my case. Now we have 3 different types of fingerprints. The main categories are loops, arches, and whorls. Now loops, they account for around about 60% of the fingerprints that are out there, and one ridge must begin at one side of your finger. It must loop around and then exit the same side it began, so creating sort of a lasso shaped loop, if you see what I mean. It's very hard for me to describe without actually showing you. And like I said, these are the most common ones you'll find. So a lot of people will have loops, and I'm just looking at mine now, and yeah, I am boring. I'm in one of those 60% categories, and I've got loops. So like I said, the ridge just starts from one side of the finger, wraps around, and then exits the same. The next category is arches. Now, arches are fairly rare on people. They're about 5% of the population have an arch, and the ridge will flow from one side of the finger across it to the other, but it will sort of rise in the middle, forming a circular arch shape. And yeah, they're not too common, and yeah, I don't see too many of those, but when you do, it's like finding a left-handed person. And the other percentage, about 35%, are whorls. Now, whorls are quite difficult for me to explain without showing you. I'm not a fingerprint expert. I'm not a person that would identify and look at the fingerprints up close under a microscope, so I'm not too savvy with a whorl. But these are sort of mostly circular. We've got, say, a whorl will have two deltas and one ridge encircling the core. And I'm trying to find out what deltas are, and I think they are basically, say, like a ridge that's sort of in like a triangular shaped pattern on your finger. A fingerprint expert will be listening to this and be cursing me because they'll know what a delta is, and it's really hard for me to explain without just showing you a picture. So the background regarding fingerprints. I know I've heard a story before about how Romans used to mark their pottery with their fingerprints, because back in those days, the Roman times, they were aware that everyone's fingerprints were different, and I think it was to stop people, say, fraudulently making pottery in their name rather than, say, the fancy Roman potter designer or whatever. So the designer would mark the bases of their pots with their own fingerprint as that unique seal to prove that it was actually their work and not some fraudster. So it goes back all that time ago that we knew about fingerprints, and we knew how, say, unique and distinguishable they were. And I think it was sort of the late 1800s, early 1900s, where scientists really started to, say, pioneer fingerprints and work out that everyone, say, has their own unique fingerprints. And I think they got it down to about 1 in 64 billion chance that you will come across two fingerprints that are the absolute same. And so far, I'm not aware of any cases where two people have got the exact same fingerprints, which just blows my mind when you think about how many people there are in the world. They've all hopefully got 10 fingers, so you've got, say, 7 billion people with 10 different fingers, then that's, 70 billion different combinations. Now, this scientist said it was down to a 1 in 64 billion chance. So then you think, well, maybe there is two people out there with the exact same fingerprint. But so far, we, as far as I'm aware, haven't found any fingerprints that are the same. Even identical twins. Identical twins will have the same DNA but completely different fingerprints. So now let's talk about my day-to-day role. I go to a scene and I develop fingerprints. Now I've got a variety of different powders up my sleeve. I've got metallic and granular powders. Now metallic are normally my, say, go-to, because they'll just, say, leave behind nicer, clearer, refined fingerprints, and it's fairly easier to clean than some granular powders. Now we often use granular powders for, say, metallic items or electronic devices, and there may be, say, some surfaces that, just our metal powders will sort of stick to or magnetize to, and in that case we'll often go for granular powders. Breaking down our fingerprint powders, I'll start with the metallic ones, and first up is aluminium powder. So this powder has been around for goodness knows how long, and it's just, say, little small aluminium flakes that we'll just apply to a surface with a brush, and it's very, very good at sort of encompassing a whole large area rather than a confined space. So it's a good way to, say, speculatively search for fingerprints. Another metallic powder that we use quite often is magnetoflake. Now magnetoflake can come in, say, silver, black, or even white, I think I found. and this is quite good for, say, a small targeted area. The reason I can favour Magnetoflake over aluminium is that I've got a bit more control over it. It doesn't get airborne so much, so it's not as, say, hazardous to myself or person that's in the scene, and it can often leave a much more distinctive fingerprint, one that is so much easier to see than your aluminium flake. Now, Magnetoflake powder is a magnetic powder, so rather than using a brush to apply, we'll use a magnetic wand. So this is just basically like a metal stick with a magnet on the end that we'll just dip into the pot, and then we'll get like a little nice brush head that forms around this magnet. The one problem with Magnetoflake is that it's going to stick to anything that's, say, a little bit magnetic. So on your mobile phones, they have, say, like magnets in them. If I was trying to powder something like a radiator, that's magnetic. So Magnetoflake just isn't going to work too well with that. Moving on to granular powders. Granular powders come in a variety of colours, the main ones being black and white. They're often a good contrast to whatever surface you're looking at. But I've seen granular powders in yellows, pinks, greens, reds, and yeah, you can get some really cool colours. I think I was rocking a pink granular powder in my case for some time, just because it works so well on, say, silver surfaces that aren't going to be too good for like aluminium powders, those silver powders that we have. So they're often quite good granular powders if you've got, say, a variety of surface colours, and yeah, you want to develop some, say, marks that you can see, because marks that you can't see aren't going to be very good. So I've got a variety of brushes that I can administer these powders with. So for typical powders like aluminium, I'll use a Zephyr or a Sky brush. The Zephyr brush is really quite fluffy, and these Zephyr and Sky brushes are probably the ones that you see people on TV twisting around, and yeah, they can cover a big surface area in quite a small amount of time. And we've got little squirrel brushes as well, made from real squirrel hair, bless them, and they're good for administering granular powders. You get a bit more control over those brushes because they don't sort of fan out and go everywhere. They stay quite small and neat, like your makeup brushes would. And we also use squirrel brushes and ostrich feather brushes for cleaning out. So if we powder a mark and we've over powdered it, we've put too much powder in between all those ridges and we just end up with like a big blotch or something, we can use our squirrel and ostrich brushes to clean out the excess powder, and hopefully our cleaning out will be good enough that we'll have the ridges remaining and we've successfully cleaned out all that excess powder. Now for marks that we can't powder, so when you think about if our sweat is, say, 95% water, if we put fingerprints onto a porous surface that's going to soak in all that water, say for example like paper, it's not going to be very, very good for, say, powder treatment. And so then we'll look to chemically treat the marks, and chemical treatment can look for amino acids in your sweat. And yeah, we've got some various techniques that can do that. So if I've got, say, a paper item or something, I'll look to recover that and send it off to a lab for another person to do all their chemical work on it. So yeah, we have a few tricks up our sleeves. However, fingerprints aren't as great to sort of develop as the TVs might make out. They always say, oh, we got fingerprints all over a steering wheel, and that's when I bang my head against the wall and think, no, like, fingerprints on a steering wheel are so hard to develop. And the reason behind that is that, say, bumpy and rough surfaces can be quite tricky to develop fingerprints on, and that's because we need sort of a nice flat surface so you can leave your entire fingerprint on. If you've got a surface that's, say, got bumps to it, then you're only going to be touching a fraction of that surface, not all of it, if that sort of makes sense. And also, you've got to think about the motion of the subject leaving these marks. So if I'm going to plant my hand down onto say this desk here and then take off my hand, it'll probably leave a nice fingerprint. However, if I'm going to sort of swipe my hand across the desk, it's not going to leave great fingerprints because that motion of me, the subject, is just going to be smudging the marks. And so we can kind of have mixed results on door handles, because when you pull down a door handle, you're going to be, say, smudging your mark most of the time. And it's the same for like a steering wheel. You're going to be smudging around the steering wheel, you're going to be touching it multiple times. And this is another factor affecting fingerprints as well. If I touch a door handle and then you touch a door handle and then someone else touches a door handle, we're going to have a build-up of so many marks that it's just going to be impossible to distinguish from. And of course, when I plant my fingerprints down, I don't wipe away your marks and leave my clear marks behind. You're just going to have, say, a mixture of all this sweat, all this water, and it's enough to kind of make you want to clean your hands after touching door handles. Another factor affecting fingerprints is the weather. So if you think about our fingerprints being 95% water, as you can imagine, the rain is going to mix with this water and it's not going to be too great. That's why we might say look to do chemical treatment on items that have been wet. So then we're looking for, say, the amino acids more than the water itself. And of course, in extreme heat, I've seen fingerprints that start to, say, break up and evaporate. So when I powder it, rather than, say, just a smooth line in your fingerprints, it's going to start breaking up and, like I said, evaporating. So sometimes you can see that. So there are a few factors affecting fingerprints. As you can imagine, with that list, it's not as easy as the TV makes out. It does require, say, a lot of precision, a lot of patience a lot of the time. And yeah, like I said, it's not as easy as you might think. And of course, I've just got to manage people's expectations when I go to a crime scene, because it may be that they've had a watch of all these programs on TV, and now they're realizing that actually it's not quite like the telly. I don't look like as handsome as Luther on BBC. And yeah, I'm not as savvy as developing fingerprints as they do on CSI Miami or whatever. So it just requires me to have good communication, and I draw, say, like diagrams of surfaces and people's fingers to just try and help the people understand the limitations that I have. It's not that I'm turning up there and I just can't be bothered. It's actually sometimes there isn't anything that I can do, and that often pains me because all I want to do is help these people, and it's hard to, say, manage their expectations if they do watch all these programs and actually it's just fiction that they're watching, and this is the real life. So once I've developed a fingerprint, I'll look to, say, capture it. Now we've got two main methods that we will capture fingerprints. We'll either lift the fingerprints using a couple of techniques, or we'll capture them with photography. So when lifting a fingerprint, I've got two main lifts that I use. I'll use a tape. It's a clear tape, a bit like sellotape, but like it doesn't leave that yellowy kind of effect. It's a completely clear tape, and that's called JLAR. So J stroke LAR, JLAR. And that's sort of your most common go-to lifting tape that I will use. And it will just, I put the tape down, I lift it up, and then put it onto a clear, say, plastic sheet. So then it can be lit up with a backlight and hopefully, say, illuminating the fingerprint. My other technique are gelatine lifts. Now these gelatine lifts can be quite good on slightly rough surfaces. And then if I've got, say, a larger area, I can have some really large gelatine lifts that I can use to lift these marks. And these come in a variety of colours. We can have transparent, black or white. My go-to is probably black because that can add a nice contrast to, say, silver or white powders. And yeah, these can be good also at lifting footwear marks. So it's not just fingerprints we'll use these gel lifts for. Moving away from lifts, we'll talk about digital capture. I think this is going to be the future now, so rather than lifting a mark and then submitting, say, a hard copy or scanning a copy of the lift, we can just take a picture of it and send it electronically and almost instantly over to the fingerprint expert to identify, hopefully quite quickly. So digital capture, although it has its positives, it also has its negatives. So if I'm trying to take a photograph of a mark that's on a curved surface, I might not be able to see all of that mark with my camera because my camera isn't going to be able to wrap around the surface. In that case, I'll have to just lift it. So there's quite a few fingerprints that I'll get on like drinks containers that I just won't be able to photograph, so then I'll have to resort back to lifting. Now once I've lifted all these marks, I have to submit them to the fingerprint experts. I can do this electronically on a scanning device that we've got. It will scan our lifts or upload our images that we can then just send straight over, and I can have a result in, say, a few hours a lot of the time, which is brilliant. You know, if you've got, say, a crime in action, so a crime in action could be something like a kidnap, hostage situation, that kind of thing, which doesn't happen all that much. Or it could also be like if you've got a burglary victim that's had all their sentimental jewellery stolen, I might plead with the fingerprint experts to look at that more quickly so we can get all these sentimental items back if I feel like the fingerprints are definitely going to be from the offender. But also another thing that I'll always make sure that I do when I leave a scene is clean up. The last thing you want is powder absolutely everywhere in your home, in your car. And I think it's the one lasting memory that when I say to people, oh, I'm a crime scene investigator, they say, oh, I had a crime scene investigator around once, they left powder everywhere. And it's always those negatives that they remember, I think. So I always find it equally important to clean up as well as, trying to develop and apprehend the offender. Because the last thing a person wants after they've been burgled is to have to clean up after the burglar and of the crime scene investigator as well. So I think if I can save them just that job, then that's all good. And I also like to pretend I'm James Bond sometimes. So I like to go in and leave, not leaving a trace that I've been there. Like I'm a secret spy or whatever. So a lot of the statistics and the information I got from a book, Forensic Science 3rd edition by Andrew R.W. Jackson and Julie M. Jackson. So I'll just shout out to them. It's a great book and the credit will go to them. And I'll wrap it up there. I hope this has been informative for you all. Maybe it's inspired you to want to become, say, a CSI or a fingerprint expert, or you're writing a novel and now you're going to have a bit more knowledge behind fingerprints and the limitations and how we'll, say, develop things. And yeah, I will speak to you soon. No doubt, no promises though. You know what I'm like. Thank you ever so much. Have a great week and see you soon. This is crime scene investigator Chris G signing off. Thank you for joining me and I hope you enjoyed listening. Be sure to subscribe and follow my social media at CSI Chris G. Until next time, stay safe out there and I'll see you at the next crime scene.